Hello, my name is Olivia. I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to speak with an American accent. It wasn't easy at first, but I never gave up. I practiced every single day, even when no one was watching. And slowly, everything started to change. Welcome to my journey. My name is Olivia, and I still remember the first day I arrived in the United States. It was a cold morning, and everything felt so big and new. The buildings were taller than the ones in my hometown. People moved fast, spoke quickly, and smiled with perfect teeth. I stood at the airport with my heavy backpack, holding my phone tightly, looking around, trying to understand the signs. Everything was written in English, and although I had studied English in school, it felt like I knew nothing. The people around me spoke English too, but it was fast, full of shortcuts and different sounds. It was American English, and I was not ready for it. On that first day, I went to a small coffee shop near the place I was staying. I wanted to buy a hot drink because it was freezing outside. I walked up to the counter and said, "1 tea, please." The woman behind the counter smiled, but I saw confusion in her eyes. She leaned closer and said, "I'm sorry. Can you say that again?" I repeated myself a little louder. "1 tea, please." She tilted her head and said, "Oh, you mean hot tea?" I nodded quickly, feeling embarrassed. I took my tea and sat down near the window. I looked outside, but my ears were wide open. I could hear the people talking at the tables beside me. They were speaking English, but not the English I had learned in books. Their sentences were short, and their words ran together. They said things like, "Wanna grab lunch?" and "Gotta." "Go soon." I didn't understand everything, but I started to notice how they said their words. The R was stronger. The T sometimes disappeared. I didn't know the rules, but I knew one thing. I had to listen. I had to listen with my whole heart. That night, I went home and made a plan. I told myself, I will listen to American English every day. I will listen until my ears get used to it. I will listen until my tongue knows what to say. And that's how it began. I started with TV shows. I remembered someone once told me that the show Friends was good for learning English. So I found the first episode online. I watched it. I didn't understand everything, but I laughed when the characters laughed. I liked how they spoke. It was fast, but it had a rhythm. I watched the same episode again the next day, but this time, I paused it after every sentence. When Rachel said, "It's like all of my life everyone has always told me, you're a shoe," I paused and repeated it. "You're a shoe." I said it out loud 5 times. I tried to sound just like her. I looked at her mouth, how she moved her lips, how she raised her voice. At first, I felt silly. I was alone in my room talking to my laptop like an actress in a play. But soon, I started to enjoy it. I made it part of my daily routine. Every morning, I watched 15 minutes of a show. I paused, I listened, I repeated. At night, I listened to a podcast while brushing my teeth. I chose podcasts that were made for American children. The stories were simple, and the voices were clear. One of my favorites was a show where kids told their own stories. They spoke slowly, but with real American sounds. I began to carry my headphones everywhere. On the bus, I listened to short clips from American movies. At the grocery store, I listened to songs with lyrics on the screen. I whispered the words quietly to myself. I did not always understand the full meaning, but I understood how they sounded, and that was enough for now. I also started recording myself. I would choose a sentence I heard during the day and record myself saying it. Then I would listen to both versions, the original and mine. Sometimes I sounded close. Sometimes I sounded strange. But every time I learned something new. Maybe my R was too soft, or maybe I didn't stress the right word. I learned by comparing. I learned by listening to myself just as much as I listened to others. After a few weeks, something changed. I was sitting in the same coffee shop from the first day. The same woman was working behind the counter. I said, "Can I get a hot tea, please?" She smiled right away and said, "Sure, one hot tea coming up." She understood me the first time. I sat down with my tea, feeling like I had won a small battle. It was just one sentence, but it felt like a mountain I had climbed. Every day. I tried to listen to new voices. I didn't want to get used to just one speaker. So I listened to people from New York, California, Texas. They all spoke with American accents, but slightly different ones. Some dropped their G at the end of words like going. It became goin'. Others spoke more slowly. I started to notice these things. I started to feel them in my mouth. After about a month, I noticed something surprising. I was walking down the street, and I heard two women talking. I understood their full conversation without trying too hard. That had never happened before. My brain was starting to think in the sound of English. It was like music, and I could finally hear the beat. Sometimes I still felt shy. Once, at a bookstore, I asked the clerk, "Do you have books about American accent?" She looked confused. I repeated, slower, "A book to learn American pronunciation." She smiled and handed me a book. It wasn't just the listening that helped me speak better. It was also the courage to speak and try, again and again, no matter how it sounded. Listening became a habit. It became part of my day, like brushing my teeth or eating lunch. I didn't listen just for practice. I listened for joy. I began to love the way Americans played with words. I noticed how they said, "Oh my gosh," with surprise or "no way" when they were shocked. I heard how they dragged some sounds to show emotion. "That's amazing." I copied all of it. I even started to dream in English. One weekend, I decided to challenge myself. I went to a farmer's market. I wanted to buy some apples, but I also wanted to practice. So I said, "Hi, how much are these apples?" The man behind the table smiled and said, $2 a pound. I smiled back and said, "I'll take 2 pounds, please." My voice felt strong. My words felt smooth. He didn't ask me to repeat anything. He just smiled and talked to me like I was one of them. That day, I went home and cried a little, not because I was sad, but because I was proud. I had come from a place where I was afraid to speak, and now I was buying apples and having small conversations. My ears had learned the sound. My mouth was beginning to follow. But even with all that practice, I still had trouble with some sounds. Some words didn't come out right. I noticed people still asked me to repeat words like third, world, and girl. That's when I realized listening was just the beginning. To truly speak with an American accent, I needed to go deeper. I needed to train my tongue, my lips, and my mouth. I needed to understand how to say those hard sounds, not just hear them. After that day at the farmer's market, I felt like I had taken a big step. I was finally able to ask simple questions, have short conversations, and order things without people looking confused. I felt proud, yes. But I also knew something else deep inside me. My American accent still wasn't quite right. I could say many things smoothly, but there were still some sounds that made people pause, tilt their heads, or ask me to repeat myself. That's when I realized something important. Listening alone wasn't enough anymore. Now, I had to train my mouth, not just my ears. It was time to focus on the hard sounds, the ones that always gave me trouble. I remember one moment that made this very clear. I was at a small birthday party for my friend Emma's son. There were a lot of people there, all speaking fast, laughing, playing games with the kids. I was standing near the kitchen, talking to a woman named Laura. She asked me what I did, and I told her that I was studying and working part-time. Then she asked me, "What's the hardest thing about moving here?" I smiled and said, "I think it's the third thing." I meant to say, the hardest thing, but the word third came out wrong. I heard it as I said it. The th was missing, and I had said something like, turd. Her smile froze for a second, and I saw her eyebrows raise. She didn't laugh, but I knew something was off. That word didn't come out right. Later that night, I sat on my bed, holding a notebook where I had written new words during the week. I circled the word third. I wrote next to it, TH sound, practice. That night was the start of a brand new part of my journey. I opened YouTube and typed, "How to say TH sound in American English." I found many videos with American teachers showing how to make the sound. One woman explained that you had to stick your tongue slightly between your teeth and blow air out. I had never done that before. In my language, we didn't have that sound at all. I tried it once. Then I tried it again, slower. Th-erd. It felt strange. My tongue felt silly. I looked in the mirror and laughed at myself. But I didn't stop. Every morning, I added 5 minutes of TH practice to my routine. I stood in front of the mirror and said, think, thought, through 3-3-30. I wrote tongue twisters and practiced them like a singer doing vocal warm-ups. One of my favorites became, 33 thieves thought they thrilled the throne throughout Thursday. It was hard at first. My tongue got tired. But I kept going. I said it again and again. Slowly, then faster. After 1 week, I could say third without feeling unsure. But that wasn't the only sound I needed to fix. The American R was another beast. In my language, we roll the R, but in American English, they curl the tongue back. It's soft but strong. It sits in the mouth in a totally different way. I realized I was still saying girl like ghoul and world like wold. So I searched online again. How to pronounce R in American English. This time I found a teacher who explained it like this. Pretend you are going to say the word air, but stop before you let the air out. I tried it. My tongue wanted to move the way it always had. Forward, not back. So I had to unlearn that habit. I sat in front of the mirror and practiced. Red, right, ride, river, really, room. I overpronounced it on purpose. Right. I didn't care how silly I sounded. I knew my muscles had to learn a new path. I even downloaded an app that helps people work on pronunciation. It had exercises where you speak into the microphone and it tells you if the sound is correct. I used it every day like a game. If I got the R right 5 times in a row, I gave myself a sticker in my notebook. Yes, stickers, like a child. But it worked. It made it fun. Sometimes I got frustrated. Some days, I couldn't say world, no matter how hard I tried. My mouth felt heavy. My tongue refused to bend the right way. I would stop and take a deep breath. Then I would go back to step 1, W, R, L, D. Bit by bit, sound by sound, another sound that always confused. Me was the flap T. In American English, many T sounds become soft, almost like a D, like in the word butter. I used to say it with a hard T, butter, but Americans say butter. The first time I heard that, I thought they were saying a different word. So I started to listen carefully and collect those flap T words. Water, city, little, better, later. I made a game for myself. I wrote those words on sticky notes and put them around my room. Every time I passed one, I had to say it out loud. The American way. City became city. Little became little. I laughed when I said them because they felt funny in my mouth. But slowly my tongue started to remember them without thinking. At work, I also paid attention. I worked part-time at a small bookstore. My coworkers were kind and they didn't make fun of my accent. But when I asked customers if they needed water, I noticed some of them would say, "I'm okay, thanks," and smile in a polite way that felt distant. I didn't want people to feel distant. I wanted to connect, so I began saying, "waiter," like they did. And something magical happened. People smiled more. They stayed longer. They asked me where I was from. My speech had started to match their ears. I practiced all of these sounds again and again, in the shower, while walking, while cooking. I repeated words like earth, third, girl, river, butter, letter, mirror, 30, and world so many times, they became part of me. I even started talking to myself while folding laundry. I would say, "Okay, Olivia, now we're going to put this shirt in the drawer, not the drawer, the drawer." I corrected myself gently, over and over, like I was teaching a small child. One night I was watching a movie and heard an actress say, "I thought it would be better this way." The way she said thought and better was beautiful, soft but clear. I played that line 10 times. I wrote it down. Then I walked around my room saying it. I thought it would be better this way. I said it slowly. I said it fast. I said it like I was sad. I said it like I was excited. That one sentence became part of my practice. I even recorded myself saying it and listened later while brushing my teeth. After many weeks, I noticed a big change. I had a phone call with a customer at the bookstore, and I gave them directions to the shop. When I finished, the man said, "Thanks, ma'am. You don't even sound like you're from somewhere else." My heart skipped a beat. I smiled and said, "Thank you so much." When I hung up, I whispered to myself, "It's working. All the practice is working." Of course, I wasn't perfect. I still made mistakes. Some days I was too tired to practice. But I never gave up. I kept returning to those sounds. I kept saying the hard words again and again. I even started helping other students in my class who were struggling with pronunciation. I showed them the tricks I had learned. Mirror practice, apps, songs, tongue twisters. One friend, Maria, told me, "You sound so American now. How did you do that?" I smiled and said, "By listening first, and then practicing the hard sounds again and again." She laughed and said, "You're so patient." I nodded. You have to be. The mouth needs time to learn. All those hard sounds, the TH, the R, the flap T, they were like puzzles. Every time I solved one, I felt closer to the voice I wanted. Not a perfect voice, not a fake one, just me, but clearer, stronger, more American in sound. And as I stood in front of the mirror one evening saying, I thought it would be better this way, I realized I was not only changing how I sounded, I was changing how I felt. I felt more free, more confident, more ready for the world. But there was still something missing. I had worked on my listening. I had practiced the hard sounds. Now, I had to do something even more powerful. Something that felt scary at first. I had to practice with real people. I had to speak out loud, not just in front of a mirror, but in real conversations. I thought I had come far. I really did. I had listened every day. I had practiced all the hard sounds over and over. The th, the American R, the soft T that sounds like D. I was proud of my little wins. The day I said third, right. The first time someone said, you don't sound foreign. But soon, a new kind of problem began to show itself. One I hadn't noticed before. Even when I said the right words, even when I used the right sounds, something still felt off. My voice still didn't sound American. Not exactly. And it made me frustrated. It all became very clear one morning at work. I was at the bookstore, arranging a new stack of books at the front table. A mother and her daughter came in. The girl was around 5 years old and very curious. She looked at all the colorful books, picked one up and asked me, "Do you have this one in pink?" I smiled and said, "No, we just have that one color, but it's a good story." The girl nodded, but then she turned to her mother and whispered, "She talks different." Her voice was soft, but I heard it like a bell ringing in a quiet room. Her mother gave a small smile and gently said, "She has a beautiful way of speaking." They both thanked me and walked away. I stood there frozen, the book still in my hand. I wasn't upset at the child. She was just curious. But those words stayed in my mind. She talks different. I didn't want to sound different anymore. I didn't want people to hear my words and wonder where I came from. I didn't want to be labeled before they even got to know me. And it wasn't about shame, not at all. I loved my home country, my native language, my culture. But I had chosen to live here, in this country, with these people. I wanted to belong fully. I didn't want to keep explaining myself every time I opened my mouth. That evening, I sat on my bed thinking about what more I could do. I had trained my ears. I had trained my tongue. But now I realized maybe I needed to train my face, my lips, my jaw, my whole mouth. Maybe that was the missing piece. Maybe the shape of my mouth was keeping me from truly sounding American. I opened my laptop and searched. Mouth movement for American accent. I found a video of a speech coach talking about how Americans move their lips and jaw in a very specific way: wider lips, lower jaw, more relaxed cheeks. She said something that hit me hard. Sound begins with shape. If your mouth doesn't move like a native, your sounds won't match theirs, no matter how well you try to say the word. That was my answer. So I made a new plan. I would become a student of the mouth. I chose 3 American actresses whose voices I liked, ones with clear, natural speech. I picked Sandra Bullock, Jennifer Aniston, and Julia Roberts. I found scenes from their movies and turned on the subtitles. But this time, I wasn't listening. I was watching. I watched how their lips moved when they said the word water. I watched how wide their mouths opened when they said now or down. I watched the way their cheeks moved, the way their jaws dropped just a little when they said can't or won't. I paused the video again and again, staring at their faces like I was studying a map. Then I opened my front camera and started to copy them. At first, it felt funny. My face didn't want to move like theirs. I wasn't used to stretching my lips that way or opening my mouth so wide. In my native language, we speak with smaller movements. Our lips stay close together. But American English is more expressive. More open, more relaxed, but big in the mouth. I had to learn a new kind of movement, one that felt theatrical, but natural at the same time. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced saying, "I can't do that." I opened my mouth the way Sandra did in the movie scene. "I can't." I looked at how my lips moved. Then I tried again. "I can't do that." I noticed that when I let my mouth open just a bit more, the words sounded closer to hers. Did this again and again with every word I knew. Better. Later. Right now. I'm sorry. What do you mean? I watched my mouth like a dancer watches their own footwork. I became obsessed. In a good way. Every time I passed a mirror, I spoke a few lines. In the bathroom, in the kitchen, even while walking past shop windows. I looked silly sometimes, but I didn't care. I was shaping my accent, one muscle at a time. Soon, I started filming myself. I would pick a short movie scene, about 20 seconds, and record myself saying the exact same lines, copying not only the words, but the mouth shape, the pauses, the facial expressions. Then I'd play the original next to my version. I listened. I watched. I took notes. What looked the same? What looked different? I marked the parts where my lips were too small, where my jaw didn't drop enough, where my smile didn't match. The American rhythm. Then I tried again, and again, and again. Some days my face got tired. My jaw felt sore. My cheeks ached from moving in new ways. It was like going to the gym, but for my mouth. I actually had to train my muscles to move differently than they had for my whole life. It was strange at first, but slowly, it became normal. I even changed how I read books aloud. Before, I would focus on the words and the pronunciation. But now I read with a mirror in front of me, watching every single shape my mouth made. I practiced exaggerating my speech, not to sound silly, but to build the muscle memory. The more I did it, the more natural it became. Soon, I started noticing something amazing. When I watched TV shows, I didn't just understand the words. I could guess how the actors were shaping their mouths before they even spoke. I had learned to read lips in a small way, and that helped me copy their sound faster. My accent was getting smoother, clearer, and more native-like. Not just in sound, but in the look of it too. One afternoon, I had coffee with my friend Brian, a local writer who often helped me with English tips. We were talking about weekend plans, and I casually said, "I think I'll stay in and watch a movie. Maybe a rom-com." He smiled and said, "You sound so American when you say rom-com." I laughed and said, "It's because I watched Julia Roberts say it 5 times last night." He was surprised. "You're training with actors now?" I nodded. "I copy their mouths. It's changing how I speak." He was impressed. "You're not just learning the language," he said. "You're learning the identity behind the language." That stayed with me. He was right. Every language has its own personality, its own music, shape, and rhythm. And by shaping my mouth like a native speaker, I wasn't just copying sounds. I was learning to speak with the same rhythm of thought, the same facial flow, the same emotional tone. It wasn't about being someone else. It was about letting English come through me more clearly, more confidently, more naturally. Now, when I have conversations with strangers, they don't stop me with a puzzled look. They don't ask, "Where are you from?" right away. Sometimes they ask after a long talk, "Wait, are you originally from here?" That question feels so different. It means they didn't notice anything unusual until far into the conversation. It means I had blended in, and that felt beautiful. All those months of watching, copying, and reshaping my mouth were worth it. I still had more work to do. I knew that. There were still moments when my native accent would slip through. But now I had a powerful new tool: muscle memory. My face had learned to move like a native speaker, and that gave me more control over my voice. But this journey didn't end with the mirror. The next challenge was to leave the practice space and go back into the world, to use everything I'd learned with real people, in real situations, where conversations were not slow, not planned, not perfect. After all those hours spent in front of mirrors, after copying every mouth movement I could from actresses and speech coaches, I started to feel something different inside me. Not just pride, not just excitement, something deeper. It was readiness. I had prepared my ears. I had shaped my mouth. I had practiced every word and every sound until I could say them in my sleep. But even with all that practice, something still made me hesitate. I had done so much work alone. Now I needed to step outside. Talking to yourself is safe. Talking to a mirror is safe. But talking to people, real, that's where everything becomes real. The first few days, I felt nervous even thinking about it. What if they laughed at me? What if I messed up a sound? What if I said something strange and they gave me that confused look I knew too well? That old fear tried to sneak back in. The fear of sounding different, of standing out in a way I didn't want to. But I reminded myself of how far I had come. I wasn't that same girl from a year ago. I had learned so much. I had worked hard. Now it was time to speak with the world, not just with myself. So I made a promise to myself. Every day I would speak with at least one person in English. Not just short answers, real conversations. No matter how small, no matter how simple, I would do it. At first, I chose places where small talk felt natural. The grocery store, the coffee shop near my apartment, the library. I practiced ordering my coffee with clear American sounds. "Hi, I'll have a medium iced latte, please." I practiced asking questions in stores. "Excuse me, do you know where the pasta is?" I even chatted with people in line. "It's busy today, huh?" Each of those little moments felt like a test, and I passed. Not perfectly, but bravely. I'll never forget one afternoon at the park. I had gone there with a book, planning to read in the sunshine. I found a quiet bench and started reading, but then a woman with a baby stroller sat next to me. She smiled and said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I looked up and nodded. "Yes, it's really nice." We started talking, just simple things, about the weather, about her baby, about books. She asked me where I was from, and I told her. Then she said something that made my heart feel light. "You speak English so well. You sound almost native." I smiled and said thank you, but inside I felt like crying. Not because I was sad, but because her words showed me something. I was being heard the way I had always wanted to be. She wasn't guessing at my words. She wasn't struggling to understand me. She was just listening, like I was anyone else. That was everything. From that day, I started to seek out these moments. I talked to the cashier at the drugstore. I asked questions at the post office. I spoke to other customers while waiting for my food. And slowly, something magical happened. My fear started to fade. My words became smoother. My confidence grew, not because I had all the answers, but because I had the courage to keep trying. One evening, I went to a bookstore event. They were having a poetry reading, and I decided to go, not just to listen, but to talk. I walked in, found a seat, and after the reading, people were milling around, sipping coffee and chatting. I saw a group of women talking about one of the poems. I took a deep breath, walked over and said, "Hi, I really like that last poem, the one about the rain." They turned, smiled, and welcomed me into their circle. We talked for over an hour about poetry, about writing, about our favorite authors. I told them about my journey with English. One of them said, "That's amazing. You've got such a great American rhythm in your voice." That word again, rhythm. I had studied it, practiced it, and now people could hear it in me. It was during one of these real-life conversations that I realized something important. I wasn't just learning an accent. I was building a voice that fit into the place I lived, a voice that could express everything I wanted to say, without fear, without pause. And I was doing it not in theory, not in practice, but in the real world. There were moments when things didn't go smoothly. One day, I was at the bank, trying to explain a problem with my card. The man behind the counter asked me to repeat myself 3 times. I could feel my old frustration rising. My cheeks burned, and my heart sank. I thought, he doesn't understand me. I must sound wrong. But then I remembered something my old language teacher once told me. Every misunderstanding is a chance to learn something new. So I slowed down, used my hands to help explain, and finally, he got it. He smiled and said, "Oh, okay. Got it now." I smiled back, and as I walked out of the bank, I told myself, "You did it. You didn't give up." That was more powerful than saying everything perfectly. Day by day, my comfort with real people grew. I started talking more at work. I joined a local book club. I volunteered at a small community center that helped kids with reading. Every time I opened my mouth and used my new accent, I felt a little stronger. And the more I used it, the more natural it became. One Saturday, at the community center, a little boy came up to me after story time and said, "You sound like the lady in the cartoons." I laughed. That might have been the best compliment I'd ever gotten. It meant I had reached the level of sound that felt familiar and warm to American ears. I had become part of the background music of this place. I belonged. By now, speaking with real people had become part of my daily routine. It wasn't scary anymore. In fact, I missed it on days when I stayed home. I looked forward to chances to chat, to laugh, to ask questions, to give directions, to order food, to make small talk at the elevator. All of it was practice, but it was more than that. It was connection. Speaking to real people helped me fine-tune things I didn't even notice while practicing alone. I learned how to respond quickly, how to match the speed and tone of others, how to pause in the right places, and how to add emotion to my voice. Those were things I could only learn by being in the moment, with a real person, in a real conversation, and something even more beautiful happened. As I started to sound more American, people around me started to see me in a new light. They didn't treat me like someone who was trying. They treated me like someone who already belonged. That made me feel strong. That made me feel like I could speak anywhere, on a stage, in a classroom, even on a podcast if I wanted to. I kept a journal during this time. Every night I would write down a conversation I had that day. I wrote about how I felt, what went well, what I wanted to improve. It helped me track my growth. I could see how I went from saying just a few words to having full conversations. From being nervous to being excited. From avoiding people to seeking them out. One entry read, "Today I helped an older woman carry her groceries to her car. She thanked me and said, 'You're so kind, dear.' I said, 'Have a good evening.' And I smiled all the way home. It was the everyday moments that mattered most. Not big speeches, not fancy presentations, just real human conversations. Speaking every day with real people gave me something no class, no book, no YouTube video could ever give: trust in myself. I had become my own teacher, my own coach, my own cheerleader. I had taken the risk of showing up, of speaking out loud, of making mistakes in front of others, and I had survived. Not only that, I had grown. By the time 3 months had passed, I no longer thought of speaking in an American accent as something separate from me. It was just how I spoke now. My thoughts, my feelings, my jokes, my questions, they all came out in the rhythm, shape, and sound I had worked so hard to learn. And yet I knew there was still one more piece to the puzzle. Because even though I was now speaking to real people comfortably, there was one place where I had never dared to show my voice before: a crowd, a stage, a group of strangers all looking at me. That was my next challenge, and maybe the biggest one of all. There I was, standing just behind the heavy curtain, my fingers trembling slightly as I held the paper in my hand. The stage was small, just a little wooden platform inside the local library's event room. But to me, it felt like standing at the edge of a mountain. A crowd of maybe 40 people sat on folding chairs, sipping coffee, flipping through programs, chatting quietly. They were here for an open mic night, a simple community event where people came to read poetry, tell stories, or share something they'd written. It wasn't a big deal for most people, but for me, it was everything. For weeks, I had been practicing for this moment. Every day, I had stood in front of my mirror and read aloud the short personal essay I had written, my story about learning English, about trying to fit in, about finding my voice. I had read it so many times I could almost recite it without looking. I had practiced every sound, every pause, every intonation. I had even recorded myself and listened back, noticing where my voice rose, where it dipped, where I needed more clarity. And yet, in that moment behind the curtain, my heart was racing. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. My mind kept whispering doubts. What if you forget a line? What if your accent slips? What if they don't understand you? What if they laugh? That old fear, so familiar, so quiet all these months, had returned, wrapping itself around me like a heavy coat. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Then I remembered something important. Just a few days ago, I had been talking with one of the women from my book club. Her name was Rachel, and she was always full of energy, always laughing about something. We had just finished a group discussion, and as we were walking out together, she turned to me and said, "You know, Olivia, the best thing about you is that you don't sound like you're trying to be perfect. You just sound real." Those words had stayed with me. Real, not perfect. Real, and it was true. Somewhere along this journey, through all the mirror practice, the daily conversations, the tongue-twisting exercises, and the rhythm training, I had learned to relax a little. I had started to enjoy the moments instead of worrying about them. I had learned to laugh when I made a mistake instead of shutting down. And most importantly, I had learned to connect with people, not by being flawless, but by being honest. So, that night, standing behind the curtain, I let go of one final heavy piece, the need to be perfect. When they called my name, I walked onto the stage and smiled. I held the microphone with both hands, looked out at the small group of friendly faces and said, "Hi, my name is Olivia, and I wasn't born speaking English like this." A few people smiled. One woman nodded. I kept going. I read my story. My voice shook a little at the beginning, but soon I found my pace. I told them about watching cartoons to learn the rhythm of speech, about whispering sounds to myself at night, about standing in front of the mirror, trying to make my mouth do what it had never done before. I told them how scared I used to be, just to say hello in a crowded room. And then I told them how I had learned to speak with joy. People listened. Some even laughed when I shared a funny story about asking for sheet at a hotel and accidentally being misunderstood. I laughed too, because now I knew it wasn't the end of the world to mess up a word. In fact, it was part of the adventure. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then they clapped. Not politely, warmly, genuinely. Like they really understood what it meant for me to stand there and share that moment with them. I stepped off the stage feeling lighter than I had in months, maybe years. Because I hadn't just spoken English, I had enjoyed it. After that night, something shifted inside me. I stopped walking around with a checklist in my head. Did I pronounce that correctly? Was that the right stress? Did I say can or can't? Did I drop my R just a little too much? Instead, I started focusing on what I wanted to say, not how I was saying it. I allowed myself to be playful. I started singing along to songs in the car without worrying if I was getting every syllable right. I began joining game nights with friends, playing charades or word games, laughing so hard I forgot to be nervous. I told stories at dinners, mimicked voices from movies, made little jokes in English, even silly puns. People laughed, not because I sounded funny, but because I was finally having fun. That was something I had missed before. In my early months of learning English, I was so focused on every detail, every vowel, every sound, every mouth movement, that I had forgotten the reason I wanted to learn it in the first place. To connect, to express, to feel alive. Now, I had that. I remember one Sunday afternoon when I went hiking with a few friends. We were walking through the woods, and someone made a joke about bears. I instantly thought of a silly reply, something about barely escaping last time, and said it out loud. They all burst out laughing. One of them, a guy named Ben, said, "Wow, Olivia, your English has gotten amazing. You're like a real part of the group now." I smiled and replied, "I've always been part of the group. I just used to talk quieter." He laughed and nodded. "Well, now we hear you loud and clear. That day, I realized that I didn't need to be perfect to belong. I just needed to be present, to show up, to speak, to laugh, to try. Yes, I still mispronounced words sometimes. Yes, I still got stuck now and then when searching for a phrase, but I no longer let those little things stop me. I learned to flow through them, to laugh, to explain, to move on. I had turned English from a classroom subject into a part of my life. And with that shift, something magical happened. I started to speak more fluently, more confidently, and more naturally than ever before. Fluency didn't come from memorizing rules. It came from living in the language. And perfection? It didn't even matter anymore. What mattered was that I could tell a joke and get a laugh, that I could comfort a friend, that I could give a presentation at work without freezing up, that I could whisper, "I'm proud of you" to myself in the mirror, and believe it. One evening, while watching TV with a new friend named Sarah, she turned to me during a commercial break and said, "I always forget English isn't your first language." That was the moment I had waited for. Not because I wanted to erase my past, not because I wanted to hide who I was, but because I had become so comfortable in my new voice that it no longer felt borrowed. It felt like mine. And the best part? It was fun now. I enjoyed speaking English. I loved playing with words, telling stories, making puns, sharing memories, writing messages, sending voice notes. It wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a joy. So if there's one thing I could go back and tell the old me, the one who was too scared to say thank you out loud at the grocery store, it would be this. Stop worrying about being perfect. Start enjoying the journey. The joy is the secret to fluency. That's what changed everything for me. And from that moment on, every time I spoke English, I smiled. Because I wasn't just speaking anymore. I was living. Looking back now, it's hard to believe that girl was me, the one who once sat quietly in a classroom, afraid to say a single word in English. The one who avoided phone calls, who smiled politely during conversations but didn't join in. The one who whispered to herself late at night, wishing she could one day sound normal. I used to think that learning to speak with an American accent was about blending in, about sounding like everyone else, about hiding the parts of me that didn't fit. But I was wrong. It wasn't about hiding. It was about growing. Step by step, day by day, I grew into my voice. Not someone else's. Voice. Not a copy of someone from a movie. My voice. A voice that carried my thoughts, my dreams, my sense of humor, my stories. A voice that wasn't born in America, but found a home here. I realized that learning the American accent wasn't just about pronunciation or rhythm or mouth movements. Yes, those things mattered. But what mattered more was the courage to keep trying, the willingness to sound silly, the strength to keep speaking even when I was nervous, and the joy of being understood. There were times I felt embarrassed, times I wanted to give up, times I thought I would never get it. But I kept going, because deep down, I believed I could. And eventually, I did. Not because I became perfect, but because I became confident, because I allowed myself to enjoy the language, to play with it, to dance with it, to make mistakes in it, and keep laughing. That's where the real transformation happened. Now, when I meet new people, I introduce myself without fear. I speak in meetings. I tell jokes. I answer questions in public. I read stories to my little niece. I record videos to help others who are learning, just like I once was. And every time I speak, I think of that quiet girl who used to be afraid to say even hello. If she could see me now, she would smile. Because I didn't just learn how to speak with an American accent. I learned how to believe in myself, and that more than anything is what changed my life.